Coming to you from an empty pedestal where a statue of a racist used to be, I'm RJ Balde, and this is the TRICHOMES Hash It Out podcast. On this show, we feature conversations about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. In this episode, I'll be talking to Christopher Mandracchia about the Drug Enforcement Administration's move to surveil and collect intelligence on people participating in Black Lives Matter protests. We'll also talk about the DEA sharing that intelligence with federal, state, local, and tribal counterparts, which Mandracchia says could cause a chilling effect on the First Amendment, how it might affect the cannabis industry and its medical and recreational clients, and much more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. Today, I am joined by Christopher Mandracchia, attorney at CDM Law based in Pennsylvania. Christopher is an experienced advocate and civil litigator who represents corporations and individuals with civil matters and contract disputes. He also handles criminal defense, DUIs, felony drug charges, cannabis matters, and a multitude of litigation and trial needs. Christopher, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No problem. Now, we were talking a little bit before we recorded that you wanted to add a little disclaimer before we started talking here that anything that you might say during this recording is of your personal opinion. Is that right?
Yes, it's my personal opinion, and I am only licensed to practice law in the state of Pennsylvania. And anything I would say here is my opinion, and it does not establish a lawyer-client relationship with anybody. So every case is unique, so you would need to consult an attorney regarding any legal issues you would have.
Certainly. Definitely. Now, how have you been doing during everything that's been going on? How's life been over in Pennsylvania? How have you been handling the quarantine, the protests?
We've we're still in lockdown over here, not out of whatever phase we're supposed to be in for everything to fully be open. As a lawyer, I am now open and courts are opening gradually. And the world of cannabis, we were deemed an essential, so that was open all throughout this whole pandemic in Pennsylvania. You could access and get your medicine from the stores, and the regulations were modified a bit to allow for change consistent with what was going on then, such as curbside pickup, online things, expansion of caregivers for patients, and things of that nature. So it's been a fascinating little area to be involved with, along with the racial tensions that have sparked based off of our justice system and the way it has been for so many years. Unfortunately, something really horrible happened, and sometimes it takes really horrible things for people to open their eyes and have a perspective and see what is really going on, and hopefully people dive in further to look at what the root of these issues are, as opposed to just, an individual getting killed by a police officer because he was murdered. I mean, that's what it looks like to me. I don't have all the evidence in front of me, but all the evidence I have looked at, in my opinion, I would consider that murder. And, that guy the officer should get what everybody else should get, because my opinion is that if my client was in that situation and put his neck on that individual, my client would have been taken to jail immediately. He wouldn't have had the benefit to get home and think about things and do that. He would be in jail. He would have been roughed up by those cops. And that what probably would have happened. That's the reality. But he was a cop, and not all cops are bad, but that cop doesn't seem like he's a good cop. And what he did was wrong. So, I mean, it sparked a big, great movement that hopefully continues to effectuate positive change in our world.
Yeah, it's a shame that it had to be such a violent example, such as the one that we saw that sparked this movement. But sometimes it takes a jarring image like that to really galvanize the people and to make them realize that just because this doesn't affect you personally doesn't mean it's affecting those around you, and that your your personal actions that you decide to take on have an immediate impact on everyone else that's around you. And I think, yeah, like it's such a shame that it had to be such a violent example that got everyone sort of passionate about this. But do you feel that in any way this is different than previous calls for justice?
Let me say, first and foremost, I think that this is not the first time this has happened. It is my opinion that this has happened numerous times. And the difference of this is that it was on video. It was at a time when everybody's at home. Everybody has a amplified, everybody's emotions are really, I think, on edge. I'm not an expert in any of psychology, but what I would say is, just a personal feelings of sitting in my house for 3 months. I could imagine watching that and, a little girl video recording this who, couldn't get involved because she probably would have been killed by the cops too. I mean, so, it's a really sad that it's a violent example, but unfortunately, there's been plenty of violent examples, but people haven't paid attention because it didn't affect them. And people need to realize that it may not affect you personally, it may not hit home to you, but the thing is, it didn't affect you yet, and it's coming for you. And if you don't stand up now, then you may be too late. And we're already late on this. The justice system has gotten this way, and there's a lot of power given to people, and especially the police have a lot of power. They have governmental immunity to protect them from this stuff. They have a big organization, the FOP, that will protect them and hire them attorneys and make sure they're getting paid while they commit these kinds of things. And if you flip that around of a person that doesn't have a badge, guess what? They're in jail, sitting there waiting with $1 million bail that they can't get out. And they spend a year before they've actually, or two in jail before they've actually seen a trial.
Yeah.
So it's a violent example, but usually the drastic things evoke the emotions to cause the change, and hopefully have opened people's eyes, because everything I've seen about that is just wrong. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
And there's no better way to say that it's wrong, and we need to get back to civility and peace. And there was a time when my parents told me that police officers would drive you home if you had a DUI. They would be more of mentor type model citizens, as opposed to a military force, which they are getting towards now.
Yeah.
And I want to say, I don't believe all cops are bad. I did want to make sure that's really clear. I don't believe that at all. There's a need for police, but we need to really think about how we go about this change so that we can protect everybody's rights. And we need to address the serious issue of racism. And it's a real issue. And people that say it isn't are blind.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
And we should always remember our founding fathers, like they started our country off of things of this nature, of a strong belief in their religion and their freedom of speech. So to get even into my opinion and about the DEA thing, to they go and take away rights and to go to that next level is something else, of granting more power. And our founding fathers would believe in the freedom of speech, not to persecute you and to do covert surveillance and all that, because you're exercising your constitutional right to free speech. And this is about free speech. That's their First Amendment right. The First Amendment is the First Amendment, not the second, third, fourth. It's the first one.
Right.
Obviously, if somebody's the first, it's important. And our country is based on the idea that you have the right to free speech. There are some restrictions in how you do it, but this a peaceful assembly and is permitted, and it should be allowed, and they should not go against anybody's right to free speech and should not be silencing people. That's a chilling effect that I cannot stand for. I believe in the Constitution strongly, I do not believe in chilling people's rights because they are exercising them lawfully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you had a reply that was published that you wrote that was a response to Attorney General William Barr's granting of the DEA to conduct this covert surveillance of those protesting the murder of George Floyd and participating in Black Lives Matter protests and fighting for racial justice in law enforcement. And I'm excited to talk to you about that. I'm looking forward to asking you a lot of questions about your response to that. But before we get to that, I just want to make sure I have a little bit of your history right. You began as an assistant district attorney in Berks County, Pennsylvania from 2010 to 2015. Is that right?
That is accurate, yes. And I did a lot of work there and took cases from basically inception to trial. So I handled cases as simple as a simple theft or traffic offense to as serious as homicide. I worked in child sex crimes and did work in drug crimes and was trained actually at the Top Gun counterterrorism. It's a counter drug enforcement training. It's a week long where you basically go through drug scenarios. And I graduated from that and learned a lot about the illegal trafficking of drugs and was trained as a prosecutor. And now I use that knowledge to help people get out of trouble and to, to protect their rights. And that's more about what I am at. But that experience was great to have, the training and to work with law enforcement, to see that there are people, doing their job, and to, you're given a lot of power as a prosecutor. And that's one of the things that also that should probably get addressed if we're reforming the justice system is 9 times you have a lot of young people that go out of law school and become a prosecutor and are given a lot of power. And as a more experienced attorney now, I sit back and think, wow, I didn't know a quarter of what I do now. And I was making decisions that affected people's lives, whether they go to jail, how long they go to jail. And there's standards behind it, but still, you're still making that decision. And you have bosses and everything, but a lot of times you have a lot of discretion. So,
sure.
It's something that as another piece to the criminal justice system that needs to be looked at, is to how much power these young prosecutors are given and how they're, what they're doing with that power.
Mm-hmm. Now, when did you start getting involved with cannabis litigation specifically?
Well, I would say when I left the district attorney's office in 2015, I got involved in a case representing a smoke shop who sold, in my opinion, perfectly legal glass paraphernalia that could be used for multiple reasons: tobacco, hemp, or obviously cannabis. And unfortunately, the cops went in and raided his whole store, took everything, and tried to ruin this guy's life. And he was operating a perfectly legitimate store, in my opinion. Now, the laws are very broad as it comes to drug paraphernalia, so it's tough to say, how it's as a matter of enforcement. The cops in the county I am in won't allow that, but if you went 10 minutes up the street, you have the same exact store, and it's completely legal. If you go to Philadelphia, it's completely okay. No one does anything with it. But for some reason in this county, it's not. So that really showed me how strong, when the government wants to come after you, they're going to come after you, and you're helpless at that point. And people don't feel that and don't understand that till you get the full power of the government against you.
Yeah. So that was sort of your launching off point then into the world of cannabis law?
Yes, to a degree. I
Nice.
think in law school and I've always had a passion for cannabis, always. Since high school, I guess. I've always, preferred maybe cannabis over alcohol, or never understood why it was illegal, why people would tell me how bad it is. I never grasped that concept, and I decided to get curious and investigate, and I went from there, and I wrote papers about why it should be legal starting in high school. And in law school, I wrote for a white collar crime class my final project was about the legality of marijuana and why it should be legal. And that was actually my eye-opening experience in law school, to hear cases like Gonzalez v. Raich, which is a case out of California, when under the old California laws, they didn't really have dispensaries. She was growing a plant for patients, and the federal government comes in and raids her. And the federal government got involved, and they said the interstate commerce applied because of the fact that even though it was completely legal what she was doing and she was giving it to legal patients, the possibility to go out the back door in the black market was what evoked the interstate commerce, so they had jurisdiction over it. And it's absurd, the leaps and bounds you saw the government do to get this thing, to get marijuana illegal, the federal prohibition, and to enforce it and stick with it. So when I started writing the constitutional cases, that really sat with me for the rest of my time. And as a prosecutor, I learned the other side. And as soon as I got out of there, I was all in of cannabis litigation, which evolved with the passing of the Medical Marijuana Act in Pennsylvania in 2016. So, I got out of there in 2015, started working with, people with paraphernalia type shops and things of that nature, and got right into the medical marijuana law started coming into play. So
Gotcha.
my eyes were opened and I was ready to help people. But as a criminal defense attorney, as a criminal attorney, you're always dealing with issues surrounding marijuana.
Yeah. Now, jumping into this reply that you wrote, that by the time this recording comes out, that will have been released this past week. So for those who are listening who may not know what we're talking about here, just a brief explanation. At the beginning of the month, the DEA was given permission to conduct covert surveillance on people protesting the murder of George Floyd. Now, you wrote a reply that spoke about how that measure could affect those who use cannabis for medical or recreational purposes. You said, quote, "One shot can start a war and one joint can subject you to deprivation of your rights." Can you explain to me a little bit more what you meant by that and what dangers you see in this level of surveillance?
Sure. Obviously, that was me coming back from my history days of, how wars get started with just one shot or something simple. In this context, especially in this context as it relates to federal law, one must always remember that currently marijuana is illegal under federal law. It is straight out illegal. It makes absolutely no sense, but it's illegal because it's a Schedule I controlled substance. And you must start with the absurdity of the fact that it's a Schedule I controlled substance. But it makes no sense. It doesn't meet the standards to be a Schedule I substance. And so when you think about that, one smell of marijuana, in Pennsylvania, you cannot smoke marijuana. You can only ingest it via vaporization or ingest it for topical or, the other forms, but you cannot smoke it. So you could do a dab out of a vaporizing thing. You can rub cream on yourself. You can get the sauce and you can then put it in food. You can do all that. You just can't smoke it. So if you were to have a joint in Pennsylvania at a rally and light that thing up, you're committing a federal crime, because the law is the protection that is in place for people that are compliant with medical marijuana laws. And in order to have those protections, that you must be fully compliant with those laws, is the Royer-Walker-Farr Amendment. Keep going with the law, the name of that, but essentially it's a rider on the spending bill. And what it says is the federal government can't spend money to enforce laws that are in whole compliance with state medical marijuana laws. So they really just can't spend money to pay a cop to go arrest you for that. That's the only protection there really is under federal law for people out for medical marijuana users in Pennsylvania, because that's what's stopping them not the fact that it's not a Schedule 1 controlled substance and illegal. So you have to be in complete compliance. And it's so absurd in Pennsylvania that you're having people who don't have their medicine in the proper bag. You can get flour from the store, and it comes in all these plastic containers. They sell it at 3.5 grams or an eighth only. And so let's say you want to get an ounce and you want to put it all into one bag. Guess what? You're now not in complete compliance, and you're getting people arrested for that. It is just like, are we joking anymore about that?
Yeah, right. Like these tiny loopholes. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, the smell of marijuana is a factor that can be used for probable cause for a police officer to violate your Fourth Amendment right to search and seizure. And what I see in my practice quite frequently is always the words, "I smelled marijuana, so I stopped the car." Sometimes you have these cops who have this magic nose and can smell it in traffic going 65 miles per hour. You know,
Sure.
you have the things that are written, and all these cops who, by the way, aren't smoking marijuana, but they're experts on marijuana, and they're pulling people over. And, you know, you have such things as, you know, there's actually a word for DWB, that's driving while black. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it. Well, guess what? Why do they have that? Because it probably is true. And I've seen stuff where I believe it's true from what I've seen. So you have these pretextual circumstances of stops that are covered by the smell of marijuana, because they say, "Oh, I smell marijuana, so now I'm going to search your car." And in Pennsylvania, the exigency circumstance to the search and to probable cause applies when a car is in play. So therefore, they smell marijuana. The law says, "Hey, we can go and search you. We believe you have marijuana if that meets probable cause." And they're going to go and search your car and find whatever they're going to find and tear your car apart, arrest you, whatever it would be. It's a bad situation for something that is just so, you know, relatively safe compared to all the stuff we're really talking about and what we should be prioritizing.
Right. Damn, these cops must be part German Shepherd if they're able to smell cannabis in someone's car driving 50 miles an hour, huh?
You would think so, right? But yet it still gets upheld in court quite frequently. Oh, you know, they're trained, they're great, they know everything. But the reality is, can you tell me the difference between the smell of a CBD flower versus, you know, flower with THC over 0.3%? Because I really can't.
Right.
I think they can smell the exact same. But that's not really worked into the law yet. People don't understand that, the nuances of medical marijuana, recreational, and hemp and CBD. Like it's all different, you know. It's all cannabis, right? And people don't get it yet. And so, you know, it's a weird world out there.
Absolutely. Oh yeah. And you know, people love to just place blanket statements on things and not really dive into the details of everything and how everything is different. Like, people think of cannabis and they don't necessarily think that, like you said, there might be CBD flower, there might be hemp only flower, and these might all look and smell the same, but they're obviously not the same.
And remember, in Pennsylvania, your DUI every day. If you use medical marijuana as prescribed daily, it's in your system. And under the current law, because marijuana is a Schedule 1 controlled substance under federal law, and they adopt the Controlled Substance Act, it's a Schedule 1 controlled substance. So there's no medical exception, as Schedule 2 through 5 have an exception unless prescribed by a doctor. Well, guess what? In Pennsylvania, your DUI if you get a medical marijuana card. And so what was once a possession to people is now DUIs, which is ruining people's lives even more, because you go to jail, automatic jail time, loss of your driver's license, good luck getting a job, because hey, you have a DUI in your record, you're harder to insure. You know, it's a serious problem out there that shouldn't be out there. And it's just these absurd laws, and it all stems out of the federal prohibition that makes absolutely no sense.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you look at the Sessions the case where they challenged this. I'm drawing a blank right now. Is Washington v. Sessions, Washington v. Barr.
Mm-hmm,
I mean, if you ever go through and read that case, it's amazing some of the things that are talked about, the people that talk about all the medical things that cannabis has done for them to help them in their lives. And yet the case, they didn't win the case because it was, you failed to exhaust administrative remedies because the DEA, you can try to get it rescheduled to DEA, but the DEA drags their feet and doesn't want to do anything about it and ignores science. They ignores the doctors. They ignore everything.
Of course. Right. So Attorney General William Barr blamed the destruction caused by the protests on, quote, anarchistic and far left extremists using Antifa-like tactics. He also said that the FBI, DEA, U.S. Marshals, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives would be, quote, deployed to support local efforts to enforce federal law, though he wasn't specific as to exactly what they would be doing. In your response that was released as a press release, you asked, who are we protecting? And is the federal government listening to the message for justice? In your own words, in your own opinion, what do you think the answers to those questions are?
I think the answer is more complex than anybody could really know. I don't believe the federal government is listening to our message for justice. I think they have to see it. And unfortunately, it takes big events to cause them to open their eyes. But are they just trying to suppress it to move on so we forget? Or are they really listening? And I think there's people listening, but I don't know if they've heard it yet. Because if you even go into the context of marijuana here, they don't understand that marijuana has been used as a tool to oppress and to effectuate racism. It really has, and the history supports it, and minorities have been discriminated against it. So clearly the message hasn't been heard about marijuana because the states have made it legal for either recreational or medicinal or some other sub form of it, CBDs or something of that nature. Almost all the states are, it's over 30 states are medical, and I think all have, but a few have some sort of approved use of the cannabis plant. So if you think about it that way, it's crazy because they're clearly not listening. So they're not listening to any of this. They're not listening. They're trying to do what he's doing. The Antifa, the terrorists. Let's go back to war and talk about and make these people associated with something we perceive as bad, which is terrorist. That's a new, word that's relatively new in the sense of you can't go around a day now without hearing terrorist. When I was a kid, I don't know how many times I would hear the word terrorist. Today, every day you hear the word terrorist. Yeah. Back then with marijuana, they would discuss that terrorists were associated with minorities, like in the sense of the same connotations, negative connotations towards minorities. So we have these negative connotations we're painting these people on so that ignorant people that aren't doing their research and homework don't realize what they're really doing to you is brainwashing you into thinking, oh, look at all these people out exercising the First Amendment rights. They're all terrorists. They're just here looting. No, sure, there's been examples of looting and things that probably shouldn't happen. And I'm sure the people that are really behind these didn't want all of that. But still, the message is there of what they're trying to say, and they're not listening.
Yeah, I agree with you that I feel like there definitely is a lack of listening and really understanding what these people protesting are trying to say. Do you have any thoughts about the recent executive order that President Trump signed that he touted as sort of a police reform sort of measure? But I don't know if you listened to his speech about it before he signed it. Not once did he mention the racial injustice that people were talking about. Not once did he mention Black Lives Matter or what the people in the streets are really trying to say. And instead, it was sort of just an incentive program for police. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Unfortunately, I did not hear that or get a chance to review that. The world's picking up again, and I'm trying to get my business in order, so I didn't have a time to fully look at that. So I unfortunately can't really comment on that. But if there's going to be police measures to put into place and reform, they need to look at the whole picture. It's not just about training police better. There's a deeper issue that needs to get addressed.
Yeah.
And that's my opinion, is that you need to go to the root of the problem. You need to go to the racism in here. And, I don't think the racism is just African Americans. It's a lot of minorities. Most minorities are looked at differently. And it's also a socioeconomic issue of where you are and, what privileges you're given. So it's a big picture that really needs to be looked at, analyzed, and addressed properly. And people's voices need to be heard, because if you don't mention those issues, it doesn't mean he didn't hear it, but he's not addressing it. So that just gets into also politics, which the political system, in my opinion, is certainly not about what's always right, but about what can make people happy. And not everything's going to make people happy right now. I'm sure there's a lot of upset police officers about how they're being treated, but how long have police officers sat there and done nothing? How long? That's the question I'd ask them. You're really upset, but how many times have you seen something that's happened and you didn't do anything? And for the people that have, good for them, and I'm sorry that they're being grouped in with them. But there's too many people sitting silent. And even in this George Floyd incident, there was, when I first saw it, I saw the one officer on the neck, and then you see the never angle, and there's like 3 of them on him. Are you kidding me? From a perspective of a defense attorney, and why are they even going at him with force? There was a call over a forgery, which is a non-violent offense of a $20 bill. The 911 call doesn't even make it seem like it's a big deal. So why are we coming at him like that? And then I've had people tell me and argue with me since writing this that he's a bad guy and he was a criminal. And it's like, that's not relevant in my opinion, because, it's a matter of what happened in that circumstance right there. There was no reason to make force that way. If he did something in his past, that doesn't mean if he's not armed, he's not dangerous right now. You didn't need to do that. You didn't need to go that far.
Sure. And there are, you can find compilations online of individuals who aren't Black who are trying to be apprehended. The police are trying to apprehend them and are fighting back or are openly attacking police, and they didn't resort to that sort of lethal force that they do so often with people that are Black or people that are of color.
Yeah, it happens every day, and I think a lot has to do with, if you think about it, I'm an attorney. The process I had to go through to become an attorney was draining. It makes you really think, do I want to be an attorney? Do I want to do this with my life? How many hours I spent, how many background checks I had to go through, all that stuff. Why aren't police subject to the same thing? I don't know their background checks and everything they have to go through, but, I was reading something that they do a 6-month boot camp. They do this, they did their background checks, but, shouldn't we look into their psychology? Shouldn't we look into more about the person and individual? I don't want these cops out there that are trying to prove something at the cost of people. They should have more restraint in what they do. They should be back. I know I keep going back to the cops that my parents described as these nice guys that, were model citizens that helped you out, that picked you up if you fell down, that, gave you a bandage if you needed it, stuff like that. Like, that's not who I perceive as cops anymore. And not saying all of them, but, the ones you hear about are not necessarily, it's usually you're going to hear about them not for a good reason.
Certainly. Yeah. I have a favorite Chris Rock bit. It's from a recent special, and he says, the police department is one of the places where you can't have a bad apple. And I think that's a lot of people chalk it up to, yeah, the police has bad apples, but everyone has bad apples. But like, you can't have bad apples in a police department. Like, that's one sort of societal organization that like you can't afford to have those bad apples because of the amount of damage that they can inflict.
Yeah, one bad apple with a semi-automatic gun or whatever they're going to give him a bulletproof vest and sovereign immunity.
Right.
Like, let's think about all this power you're giving that person.
Right. Yeah. Like it's
but
more dangerous than just calling it a bad apple, for sure.
And remember, the other issue is protecting those people. You know, I understand they're in a high stressful situation and they're doing things and putting their life on the line, and you want them there to protect you. But there's more to it. There needs to be accountability on every end. They need to be treated like they should be treated like everybody else in the justice system. But you know, there has to be some differences because of what they do. And I understand they are more likely to have a gun on them. They got to protect themselves. They deal with criminals, bad guys. If somebody is, you know, if there's a mass shooting, they're there. They're the first people there. So, you know, people need to remember that there's good cops out there who have died for people. And, you know, so there needs to be a middle ground where we can have peace and all live in harmony. And, you know, kumbaya is what I call it. But hey, isn't that the goal here, to have everybody living a good life and be peaceful and happy and live together amongst each other, accepting of each other? Because that's the world I want to live in.
One can only hope, man. That's for sure. I want to live in that world too. I'll meet you there.
Right. Right. So let me know.
Yeah, right?
We'll create it, right?
Yeah. We'll build it right now. Yeah, we'll work on it for sure.
Right. We'll make, first thing is marijuana is legal. How's that?
Yeah, that's the base. That's the start right there. That's our First Amendment right there. Is cannabis is fully legal. Straight
that's
up.
What I'm saying.
There are no illegal plants in this dream scenario that we're coming up with right now.
That's true.
So we've seen this kind of surveillance before, right? From the Department of Homeland Security monitoring Twitter and other social media platforms for intelligence on protesters during the killing of Freddie Gray, to the DHS's plans to plug federal officers into protests following the killing of Michael Brown in 2014, to the FBI monitoring and surveilling Occupy Wall Street protesters in 2011. So what can individuals do to continue to practice their First Amendment right to speak up against racial injustice and government overreach and still protect themselves from the potential of being subject to this invasive surveillance? Is there any way?
I mean, common sense is first thing comes to mind. Just be careful about how you do things and what you do, and to make sure you know, there is certain restrictions on speech, like there's time, place, manner restrictions. You can't use obscenity laws. There is restrictions on speech, but you must do it in a way that you can amplify your voice in a peaceful way. But that's not going to necessarily still protect you from covert surveillance, with whatever that means right now.
Sure.
That's another issue. What does that mean? I mean, realistically, I operate on the assumption I'm being watched every day. That's how I live my life.
Yeah.
Because that's what I see, and I know there's cameras up there that can zoom in and read your phone. You know, that they can read the little, if you have a polo shirt or whatever you got on, you can probably see that little horse. You know, that's just the nature of the world we live in. Everything is on phones now, and everybody texts everything and leaves trails of things. So, I mean, realistically, it's, if you can get rid of your footprint, you're probably safer. But it's not possible nowadays to not have a footprint to get your voice out there, because you're going to be using social media. You're going to be talking to people. You're going to need to use that stuff. So unless you know, I'm sure there's ways of doing things, but the reality is, I think somebody once told me, it's law enforcement draws the line where the law enforcement draws the line. Like where they draw that line, they're going to enforce it, and you don't know where that line is drawn, and they draw a line in the sand, and you react because if they want to come after you, it's you feel helpless. If you've ever known anybody who has been arrested and been charged with something very serious, especially if they didn't do it, and it is a life-changing experience that shakes your world, and you don't know what to do next. You really don't. You don't. It's helpless. It's a helpless feeling. And unfortunately, I get to help people through that process on a daily basis, and I get to relive it and live it with them. And it's challenging for me to go through those with people and see what happens to these people realistically through the whole system, from the big arrest to trial. And even think about when you go to trial, people don't know a lot of times about jury nullification, where you don't have to follow the law. You can do what you think's right, but I can't tell you that. So, I can't go in as an attorney and say, hey, you can do whatever you want. I have to say, you have to follow the law. And I can't tell you. And by the way, they threw out all this awesome evidence I had that showed that this guy really did it. They're not going to let me bring any of that in right now. That's the kind of stuff that happens in court where it skews justice, because there's laws and rules, and it's really working the system and understanding that.
It's a sticky situation. It's sort of protest at your own risk, I suppose.
Unfortunately, yeah, especially with how broad that was. I mean, understand that memorandum was a 14-day authority, but let's be real. I mean, they're probably still doing stuff. I mean, you never can really know if the government's watching you. You should really be opposite assumption they are watching you.
Yeah, I'm right. I mean,
can I say one more thing? Because I don't know if we really hit on it yet, but I do mention it in my article, and I think it's really important that people need to know and understand that there's a racist history behind marijuana. And even I should mention that I shouldn't be using the word marijuana, but I do use it because it's now more of a legal definition. Marijuana is, at least in Pennsylvania, hemp would be 0.3% or less of THC. And marijuana is above that, but we're still talking about the cannabis plant, and we're just talking about a concentration of the THC within it, so whether it's hemp or marijuana. I mean, that's the distinction we're talking about, and people don't understand that could also be what day we're measuring it. So one day it could be hemp, and one day it's going to be marijuana. I mean, under the law, it's crazy. So, remember that there's a racial history behind those words, which is my understanding and my research leads me to believe it's based off the time with which it's enacted and the Mexican War that was going on, and they switched it from what was always referred to as cannabis to marijuana because of it was, I think, a street slang word in Mexico. And then, you have this negative connotation again, which this is what we talked about, the Antifa stuff. You put these negative connotations at this thing, throw it at it, make them bad people, make people, go around that and not like these people. We don't like these protesters because they're Antifas, they're terrorists. No, they're United States citizens exercising their First Amendment right, and people that were illegally using cannabis back then as a medicine, that got it taken away with taxes, and then it slowly worked into. I wrote down a quote of Harry Anslinger, who is one of the, well-known racists that got the federal prohibition underway of marijuana. And he said, the primary reason to outlaw marijuana is its effects on the degenerate races. He talked about how it would make your white women sleep with the Negroes. This is the kind of things he is quoted of saying. And this is what was forced into making this cannabis become marijuana and associated with people of color and minorities of Mexicans. And then you had African Americans, and they had their jazz clubs, and people, the people that were the white supremacist type of people that were scared of the difference, the dancing, the people having fun, and they saw somebody smoking a joint there, it must be bad, and you can't have fun back then. I mean, think about it. Elvis Presley was ahead of his time, but because he danced on TV. So this is the era we're talking about is a different era full of people that have racism instilled in them, and then they use that racism to their advantage to put it onto a plant that they wanted illegal. And I'm sure there's political reasons behind it as well, but there's a serious racism behind this. And remember that it was a discriminatory effect that came about that the minorities, since marijuana became illegal, are disproportionately affected than others. You're going to be more likely as an African American male to get arrested for marijuana than a Caucasian male. It's just a fact. And you can't skew those facts. So people need to not forget the racial history here. And that is something that needs to be addressed, because if we're trying to balance the equation and to try to end the discrimination of racism, a great start, in my opinion, is to legalize marijuana. Just legalize it. Let's make it legal. Let's get rid of the lies that we're telling everybody about the reefer madness era, that it's going to kill you. And do you ever see the ads where they inject it into people? Are you joking me? I've never seen somebody inject marijuana. I'm sure you could try it. I don't know. It's a story.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Right? Like I don't know. I've never thought about injecting marijuana, but if you look at those ads, you have a light-skinned African American injecting a white woman with marijuana. I mean, how much more imagery of racism do you need? And then it says, like, the devil's weed. Like, look at the imagery there. It says all. It speaks. Those pictures speak more words than I can even come up with right now.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because that is certainly, I feel like the racial disparity is something that in the legalization movement isn't really highlighted as much. We talk about the business, we talk about the medical benefits, we talk about industry, tax revenue, all of that. But racial disparity, I feel like, falls to the wayside a lot. And so I thank you very much for bringing that up here.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to speak, and I spent years learning about this stuff. So, I have so much to tell, and not everybody always wants to listen. So if you're listening out there, I thank you very much. And, you can check out my website at cdmattorneys.com. I'm CDM Law, and I try to advocate for people who have issues or persecuted and are treated unjustly, because I believe in the Constitution. I believe in people's rights. I really do. And that's why I'm an attorney. I want to defend people who are deprived of their rights.
Yeah. Well, Chris, I really appreciate you coming on the show and sharing your perspective. And I thank you for the work that you're doing to fight for the justice for those in the cannabis community and beyond. And thank you for coming on the show. And I hope you stay safe, and I hope you stay healthy out there. And hopefully one day we can have another conversation, maybe in person, even if it's 6 feet apart.
Definitely. It's going to be hard if I wear my mask for you people to understand me. That's my only problem.
Yeah, I know, right? It'll be a muffled conversation. Yeah.
And just remember, everybody, be careful sharing your cannabis with people nowadays. You don't want to get sick.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, sessions have definitely changed over the few months. That's for sure.
Is that the truth, right?
Yeah.
Hey, man, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate what you guys are doing, and keep educating everybody about cannabis. It's a great thing everybody's doing out there, and I'm glad to be a part of this movement.
No doubt, man.
Effectuate change.
We are happy to have you, man. Thanks again for stopping by. I appreciate it. My thanks again to Christopher Mandracchia for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@TRICHOMES.com. You can help others find the show by taking a moment to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. You can also join in on the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by TRICHOMES.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening.